that, I will go ahead and get to the kind of meat of the presentation. So what are we going to be doing today and why are we doing it? So our purpose today is to really raise awareness and rally folks around key 2020 civic engagement opportunities, obviously including the census and elections this year. And our hope is that community members are able to connect, albeit virtually, with other SEAs around the country, and that you all feel energized about key upcoming civic engagement points and have kind of improved or learned new things about advocacy or civic engagement. And so in terms of the process, my plan for today's agenda is to kind of start off getting on the same baseline about civics and the three branches of government and why we advocate and what it looks like. And going into 2020, what does that civic engagement look like this year in particular? And with that, I have three amazing panelists who will be able to share different perspectives about the civic engagement work they do and they've done. And hopefully that gives you a sense of how you can contribute to the civic engagement opportunities this year. We'll have some time for Q&A as well. And I wanted to also take this time to have a call to action for everyone on the line and see how we can come together, albeit virtually, and use 5 minutes or so to try to impact change in our personal networks. And then with that, we'll close. So that's just an overview of today. And today also happens to be National Voter Registration Day. So it's perfectly timed for our civic engagement session. And hopefully that you walk away with this, with new skills to kind of engage, especially today. And then I will go ahead and play a quick video to just kind of prime and lay the foundation for the discussion we'll have today. So Phoebe will go ahead and play that for us.
Of the United States.
I've been broke all my life, but I kept hope all them nights. You see business in my city? Yeah, they closed all them twice. I was just riding down Salem, all them damn potholes, I can't drive. I know y'all can fix it faster, but I know y'all won't try. Don't nobody care about us, and that's why I don't vote. Voted for Obama back in 2012, I remember that's when I had hope. He was saying, yes, we can, and everybody got less food stamps. And when I turned 21, I was still broke, I'd never vote again. I don't think I ever had a president make my life better. Did it all on my own, ain't no politician ever do a nice gesture. I don't even know the mayor's name, I ain't never seen her one time ever. Tell me how she gonna help the city. What I'm supposed to do, write letters? What I'm supposed to do, blame Trump? He ain't never really gave a, ain't nobody raised minimum wage. None of these jobs pay enough. I think they just wanna keep us broke, cause they ain't putting none in place for us. This how all my people feel, but we gotta learn, we complained enough, let me change it up. Everything I just said, everybody I know think the same way. See, they don't wanna see us vote, and we never do, so we see the same thing. But all our votes really do count, and they'll never really let it show. So now I'm finna break it down, cause if I don't, you would probably never know. First thing first, you know back in middle school when they taught us, it was three branches of the government. We forgot it when we got older. It's the judicial, the legislative, and executive. But all we know is the executive. That's the mayor or the governor and the president. Now none of them three people make no laws, they just be checking them. The laws come to their desk and all they do is say no or yes to it. So when the news station tried to tell us that Barack Obama couldn't put us on, we was all salty at Obama when it was the Congress members all along. We gotta focus on the legislative branch, yeah, they the ones that make the laws. Yeah, they the ones write how much food stamp money you get on the card. But when people that wanted to help us wanted the job, I know they probably lost. Cause we ain't even know their name, we ain't know their face, we ain't know it all. So the Congress or the State House, that's legislative, they make laws. So what we want from the president is what they do, okay y'all? See, they election every 2 years, but we don't ever even go to those. The Congress, they can raise minimum wage, but we ain't even really know it though. So you know how back in 08, when we all voted for Obama, we was all supposed to go back in 2010 and vote for the Congress. Cause they the ones make child support laws, they the ones choose if your kids at school get to eat steak or corn dogs. The State House make the court costs. So if the country failed, then you can't say it's them, it's your fault. Cause y'all ain't know to vote for Congress members that was for y'all. And they don't gotta leave after 4 years, and we just let them sit. See, they don't wanna tell you this, they want you to focus on the president. Now the third branch is the judicial, that's judges. They the reason why John Crawford and Trayvon ain't had justice. So when Meek Mill got locked up just for popping willies, we blame the judge and not the city when they let her get voted in. Cause they ain't know who to vote against. Imagine life on the other side. Roads better, schools better, everybody get their license back. Grocery store food better, custody of your kids back. Homeless people get new shelters. If we gon' fix the U.S., we gotta start with them 2 letters. Me and you. Somebody told us that the government wanna keep us broke, but the only reason why those people in the government is cause we ain't vote. And I ain't talking about the president, I'm talking about the ones we ain't know. See, they was gonna try to keep it low, but it's gonna hurt them when they see the polls.
Every time you stay home, someone is making a decision about you, making decisions about the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food your kids eat, and how much money you bring home every 2 weeks. So every time you sit out an election, every time you don't show up because you think it doesn't matter, someone else is happy that you didn't show up, so they can make that decision for you. Vote.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Phoebe. I'm really making Phoebe work today with all these transitions, so shout out to her behind the scenes. So I hope that kind of, I think it's a refresher for most of us, but I think just to set the baseline about why we're doing all this and why be civically engaged. And I think the answer to that, and hopefully the themes that came out of that video, is that you matter and you have power and your vote counts. And so one of the ways you can exercise that power is through advocacy. And this being CREC's digital advocacy training, I'm assuming that everyone here has an interest in exercising that power or helping their community members exercise that power. And just wanted to set a baseline of how we're defining advocacy and what it is to us. So for the purposes of this, we'll define it as an activity which aims to influence decisions within political, economic, and social systems and institutions. And so when we think about advocacy, we think about, who do we advocate to? And we think about the 3 branches of government and what the different functions are so that we know who to advocate to for what. The first one we'll look at is the legislative. So pulling out some of the lyrics that Yellow Pain, which is the name of the rapper in the video, he has these lyrics that hopefully help illustrate what exactly they do. And the legislative branch is in charge of making the laws by writing and voting on bills to send to the executive branch. So I'll just wait for the slides to catch up real quick. Great. So basically, you'll have your city council that makes laws for your city. Above that, you'll have the state house and your state's capital that makes the laws for your state. And at the national level, the United States Congress, which makes laws for the entire country. So when we are trying to change the law, that's when we advocate to the legislative branch. And so I'll be going through these branches with an example that hopefully illustrates the differences in what they do. So for example, back in March, Congress passed the CARES Act, which provided a certain extent of economic relief during the coronavirus. And we're currently counting on Congress to come to an agreement of some sort to vote and pass a new COVID relief package. So that's one of their functions, right? And that's a really clear, tangible way to illustrate it right now. When we look at the executive branch, I think his lyrics are very clear-cut about what their function is. So they carry out and enforce the laws through the president and different agencies, with each state having their own governor and state agencies, and most cities having a mayor and local agencies that carry out these functions at the local level. So when we're addressing how laws are being enforced or implemented, that's when we advocate to the executive branch. So kind of going off of this COVID relief example, the US Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, created a rule that directed districts to give private schools a larger share of federal coronavirus aid, money that would have otherwise gone to public schools. And it was her plan to send $2 billion in federal education dollars to private schools. So most of the CARES Act K-12 education funding was intended to be distributed to public and private elementary and secondary schools using a formula based on how many students from low-income families they serve. But DeVos said that she wanted money sent to private schools based on the total number of students in the school, not how many students from low-income families attended. So that would have sent hundreds of millions of dollars more to private schools than Congress had intended. So hopefully that helps illustrate how Congress makes the laws, but in terms of how they're enforced or they're implemented, that's in the executive branch. So next we'll take a look at the judicial branch and how they function. So when we're addressing how laws are being interpreted or applied, that's when we advocate to the judicial branch. So they interpret laws and constitution in court cases. So at the highest level, we have the US Supreme Court that has the final say on the US Constitution, just as the state Supreme Courts do with state constitutions. Local courts largely apply the law in criminal trials, and there are also special courts like immigration courts that work to make decisions on those specific issues. So in this same example, just to follow through, after receiving the information, a federal judge ruled that the move by DeVos violated the law, and then the rule was then dropped. So I hope that was just a tangible example of how during current times, how these three branches are operating in tandem with one another, and sometimes, obviously check and balance each other as well. So I just wanted to lay that foundation of the understanding of the different branches and levels of government to serve as the baseline for our discussions to why civic engagement is so important. So kind of transitioning into what does that look like in 2020? And I have a really good set of panelists today that I'm luckily going to be able to pick their brains and have them share with you about their experience and their knowledge. So I'll go ahead and introduce them now. They're all on the call today, so yay, we got them all here. The first one is Janbon Sinlapasai, she, her, hers pronouns. She is a partner with Miranda Sinlapasai Garcia LLC. She represents clients regarding complex and general immigration law matters, including visas, citizenship issues, consular processing, removal defense, and appeals. Ms. Sinlapasai focuses her practice in assisting survivors of crime, including children who have been abused, abandoned, neglected, and individuals who are survivors of domestic violence, serious violent crime, and human trafficking. Ms. Sinlapasai received her JD from Northwestern School of Law of Lewis and Clark College, 2002, and is a member of the Cornelius Honor Society. She has her BA in English and Philosophy from Santa Clara University, and she's an active member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and currently serves as the co-liaison for national advocacy. Her volunteer work includes being a board member of the American Civil Liberties Union, Oregon Attorney General Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, Department of Justice Immigrant Crime Victims' Rights Enforcement, FBI Citizens Alumni, Oregon Asian Pacific American Bar Association, Oregon Minority Lawyers Association, and Oregon Women's Lawyers Association. She is also the past chair of the Oregon Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs. So I think by the length of her bio alone, you all can tell she has a ton of experience, and I'm really happy to have her on the line. Our next panelist today is Chai Mua. So Chai Mua, she currently lives in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. She holds a bachelor's degree in human services management and is currently pursuing a master's degree in organizational leadership. She holds a family development specialist certification from the National Resource Center for Family-Centered Practice and the University of Iowa School of Social Work. Chai started off her work in community organizing with one of Madison's most isolated neighborhoods, where she realized her passion to fight for racial and gender equity. She has over 15 years of extensive experience working with low to no income communities, especially the Hmong community. Chai is currently the Community Power Coalition Director for Freedom Inc. and Program Director for Freedom Action Now, Freedom Inc.'s 501c4 affiliate. So virtual welcome to Chai as well. And our last panelist today is Chris Fan. She is the Field and Programs Associate at APIA Vote. In her day-to-day work, she works with local community partners to implement voter contact and education programs, manages APIA Vote's voter protection hotline, and collaborates with research groups and national API coalitions to develop more civic engagement strategies. Outside of APIA Vote, she studied computer science and urban studies at Stanford University and is the ambassador coordinator for the 2020 Project, a project that works to register APIs to vote. In her spare time, she explores the intersection of art and advocacy through dancing and writing about Vietnamese American identity. So welcome to all three of these awesome powerhouse ladies on the call today. I'm really excited to have them share a little bit about their work and how they view civic engagement this year. So with that, I will kick off 2020 with one of the most pressing things that comes once every 10 years, so that is the 2020 census. And so in the rap, when he's talking about imagining life on the other side, roads better, schools better, grocery store food better, these are things that happen because of civic engagement tools like the census. So when we talk about the census, what does it affect? What's at stake? It affects the next 10 years, $1.5 trillion in federal funding, visibility, and political power. So when we talk about funding, you can think about each member of your community who might be at risk of not being counted and how that loses thousands of dollars a year for each uncounted person. And since the census happens only once every 10 years, this loss will not just happen 2020, 2021, but also through 2030, adding up to a lot of lost resources. So participating in the census is a way to claim your community's fair share of federal funding. In terms of visibility, the census also informs decision makers, and our elected leaders can't represent us fully if we're not represented in the data for our communities. Population data has an effect on planning and investment. So when you have an accurate count, you have local school districts who know where to build new schools or expand existing ones. You have local governments who will know how to plan for housing needs. You'll have healthcare providers who will know what type of care they need to prioritize for their populations. And advocates who are on the call, you'll have better data to be able to go into your elected officials' offices and really push for the policies that will help the constituents of that elected official and have the data to back it up. And when we talk about political power, especially in an election year like this, you're talking about the apportionment count that will determine, which states get how many seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, right? And you're talking about population counts that are used to redraw political districts at all levels of government. You're also making sure that folks know how many people are there so that the next time there's an election or the next time there's a census, those jurisdictions are providing language assistance and language resources for community members like Southeast Asian Americans. So all of these things that, the census is not as glamorized or as, flashy as elections sometimes, but I think when you look at the long-term consequences, there's obviously a huge impact that will come with an undercount. So when we think about what happened in 2010 and the data what that revealed, we think about the 650,000 SEAs, or 23% of SEAs who lived in, quote, hard to count tracts. So that's nearly 1 in 4 of our SEA community members. So when you think about your loved ones, when you think about your family, and you think about 1 in 4 of those folks not getting counted and all the lost resources that are rightfully theirs and all the political representation that's rightfully theirs, just want to kind of stress that urgency and the importance of the census. So that's my census spiel before we head into the big kahuna that I'm sure is on everyone's minds, especially on National Voter Registration Day, is the 2020 elections. So I think the video really ended on really strong points made by the rapper's cousin, actually, who is a candidate. But they basically just talked about why voting is important, not even about voting for them, but every time you stay home, someone is making a decision about you. And every time you don't show up, someone else is happy that you didn't show up. So when you think about, how we're feeling right now and how we can affect change, this is a tool that we can use. This is a tool that we want to empower our community members to be able to use. And so just wanted to kind of ground that as well. Because presidential elections, they don't just affect the next 4 years. You think about what's at stake. It's very tangible with the census. You have this pot of money that we know and, the 10-year timeline. But when you think about presidential elections, yes, they happen every 4 years, but we think about SCOTUS nominations or Supreme Court nominations. We think about immigration enforcement and deportations. Those aren't just 4-year things, right? Those aren't just 4-year impacts. We think about public education funding. So these are things that will impact a whole generation of folks beyond just those 4 years of the presidency. And so with this, I kind of just wanted to illustrate some of the data that we have based on the post-2016 election Asian American survey. And huge credits to the team who put this together. So I'm going to credit Karthik Ramakrishnan, Jitnel Wong, Jennifer Lee, and Tae Cooley, who were the lead researchers on this. So this first slide illustrates party contact by ethnic groups. So these are the percentage of people where someone from a political party contacted them in 2016. And so as you can see, Vietnamese is at 35, Cambodian and Hmong, though, are at the bottom at 27 or 23 and 16%. So when we think about outreach, these are the numbers in 2016 that we have for certain Southeast Asian American communities. The next slide shows contact by a nonpartisan person. So even beyond the two political parties, we think about Cambodian Americans, Vietnamese Americans, and Hmong Americans. Hmong is sitting at 7%. So someone from outside the two major political parties, only 7% of Hmong Americans said that they were contacted. The next slide is just overall context. So when you compile all those numbers, what are we seeing? So we're seeing that there's still huge opportunities for contact to be made to these folks and for them to be engaged in elections. And I think that's where, you know, folks on the line today are going to be kind of key to this election and engaging their communities to vote, to register to vote, to get out the vote. So I will now kind of turn it over to Chris from API Vote and the 2020 project to talk about what other data do we have about Asian American and Southeast Asian American voters, and what does it tell us about how to engage this year?
Thanks so much, Alyssa. I think I wanted to kind of add on to that last point that Alyssa made about community contact and, you know, who's been contacted by the political parties. Even just recently, the 2020 Asian American Voter Survey actually just came out last week, and so we have a lot of new data to look at. And even in that most recent one, you would think that maybe community contact and outreach has improved since then. And across the two major political parties and community organizations, Asian Americans reported that over 50% of them were not contacted at all. So I think that's something that Alyssa was stressing, that like that community contact is really key, and it's really still not there. And so with that acknowledgement, I kind of wanted to point out the significance of eligible AAPI voters and our voting power. And when I say Asian American versus AAPI, I'm citing from the specific numbers that are drawn from different sources. So those are done including PI folks when I use the term AAPI. So there's right now in 2020, there's over 11 million eligible AAPI voters. And I think like that's really significant to talk about when you just talk about numbers, but I think something that I also wanted to stress is that recently, I think early May 2020, Pew Research reported that Asian Americans are the fastest growing segment of eligible voters. When we talk about the kind of community contact, who's being acknowledged by the political parties, sometimes the AAPIs aren't mentioned, but that's because we've grown so rapidly in the past 20 years or so. We make up about 5% of all eligible voters, and from 2000 to 2020, AAPIs, I believe, more than doubled in terms of eligible voters. So that's already really significant because obviously we want to look at how the general public is addressing us, but also our voter turnout is also increasing. So from 2014 to 2018, we compared midterm year elections, which was talked about in the video, just to compare both. But Asian American voter turnout increased from 28% to overall 42%. So in terms of voting power, we're significantly growing. A lot of where our populations are in very critical places for elections, which is something that you always got to keep in mind. And then I wanted to also talk about kind of what, within this umbrella, kind of what the Southeast Asian population kind of looks like. So in the second bullet point that Alyssa has, in the 2018 American Community Survey, the citizen voting age population, which is all folks above 18, comprised of over 1.5 million Southeast Asians. And among that, I have also the percentages of, out of all Southeast Asians, what percentages of the overall populations, including folks under 18, sorry about that, are voting age eligible. So for Lao folks, that's about 65%, same with Vietnamese, including it in Hmong, it's around 56%. And I think when you're like, what does that mean? That means that essentially in the Southeast Asian community, our community is really young. So when you think about advocacy and when you think about outreaching to folks, the 2020 election is obviously very important. But when you're talking about voting engagement, how are you activating the youth? Because that comprises a significant population of the Southeast Asian American community. So for this segment, I really wanted to emphasize one major thing in the current 2020 Asian American Voter Survey, which is something that's really critical with the pandemic right now, is how people plan to vote. And I know as you are talking to folks and you're trying to get them out to have their voice heard, we also want to take into those considerations. I think previously we could say, come to the polls, and we can we can make a plan for it, but it's even more important this time around. We noticed that in the 2020 voter survey that a large number of folks were planning to vote by mail. And there's a lot of different, when you're thinking about advocacy, there's a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different rules around different states on how you can vote by mail. Some do it automatically, some have different, like you have to submit your absentee ballot request and have it come back. So I think something to keep in mind is just because so many people are planning to vote by mail, make sure they know how they're going to do it. And then we also noticed that a significant portion of Asian Americans, and also in this data set, Vietnamese Americans, are also planning to vote on the day of the election. So with that in mind, when you're talking to folks about their plan to vote, how are they making sure they're staying safe, making sure they know where their polling places on the day of, making that plan to maybe vote at a time, if possible, where it isn't as crowded. So all of those things, I think, when you look at people's plans, help them plan it out. Those are the main things I wanted to emphasize with this data.
Thanks, Chris. Hopefully that helps as you all kind of think about, I know the voter engagement strategies that you're already employing or you're going to ramp up in the next few weeks that we have left. But these next data sets, they were jarring to me and interesting, and I wanted to pull them out for this presentation. This is other data from a 2016 post-election National Asian American Survey as well. And for these questions, it asked about how would you say Asian Americans have, how much in common would you say with Black Americans, right? And so when we look at the 3 Southeast Asian ethnic groups that they have disaggregated data for, I think it's interesting to see how many respondents reported little or nothing at all in common, right? You look at 51% of Hmong folks thinking they have little in common, you know, with Black community members, right? The next slide is in common with the Latinx community, right? And again, you have large numbers of certain communities who say they have little to nothing in common with these other communities. And I think that was just interesting to me because when we think about advocacy, these policies that we're hoping to implement or hoping to, you know, pass, they're not just for our community. I think they're also beneficial and helpful for other community members outside of the Southeast Asian American community. And so I wanted to kind of use that to pivot to my next question, which is to Chai, because Chai is with Freedom Inc., and they've been at the forefront of working with the Black community in Wisconsin, and their organization has shared Southeast Asian American and Black leadership. So I wanted to ask you, Chai, how do you view Southeast Asian American civic engagement as a way to demonstrate solidarity with other communities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, it's something we consistently are talking about here in Wisconsin with our partners across the state. I think that data you showed is quite interesting and does reflect what our community tells us. But what our community doesn't see is we have so much in common, you know, because of the failed refugee resettlement programs, we were actually put right into some of the low income neighborhoods, living upstairs and downstairs and next to Black families, not knowing that a lot of the issues that we actually experience now, such as deportation, is all due to this all the anti-Blackness that's happened in this country. And because we were in their communities, like Kadra always says, we also experienced some form of those policies that was used to be enforced on Black families. So with Southeast Asian civic engagement and how we demonstrate solidarity, our conversations have really shifted to what does solidarity look like and what is actually like, where in this fight is it for us, right? We can't actually just say like we show up in solidarity. We actually need to show up because this is our fight. We also know one conversation we've had with our Southeast Asian folks throughout the uprising this summer is with us showing up in the streets, there is a big possibility that we will be harmed. But when it's our fight, it's like when we're saying we're also fighting for us and our communities, we don't expect someone to come and thank us for being in the street. We don't expect someone to say, oh, look, these folks showed up in solidarity. because we're actually ultimately fighting for us as well. And so, this right before the primary elections, we as an organization launched a Vote for Black Lives campaign, where we really talked about when we vote to defund from police, when we vote to invest in Black lives, that also means we're investing in our communities, because many of our community members, Hmong and Khmer community members, still share the same neighborhoods with Black families. And so it really means investing in our communities as well. And sharing that although our community members may not show up in the street, they actually have to show up at the polls.
Thanks, Ty. I think it'd be really interesting to see how, if there's another kind of survey like this, if that shifts at all, especially with all that's going on today, and how it's rightfully at the forefront, hopefully, of everyone's minds when we think of how we're voting and who we're voting and the fight that we are all fighting in. And that kind of pivots nicely into my next question, which is to Chanpon, about the landscape of today and all that's going on. So we have COVID-19 pandemic, we have wildfires that are going on in the West Coast, we have Southeast Asian American deportations that have spiked under this administration. We have human rights violations happening in immigration detention centers, family separation. And so all of that kind of illustrates, all the things that are going on today, and how does that illustrate how it's necessary for our communities to be counted and to vote in terms of what the long-term consequences might be. So I'll ask that to Chanpon.
Thank you, Alyssa. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I hope you guys can all hear me okay. I'm outside, and it's nice to actually be outside. As you guys saw in the news, national news, we were burning for literally 2 weeks, and we continue to burn now. And I think that question that you pose is so important and so vital, because often our API communities have not been as involved historically in the front lines. Portland has been put on the map because of our Black Lives Matter movement, but also because of the fire, but also because of COVID. Unlike the national framework where there's been a lot of Black community members who have been high ranking, in the state of Oregon, it's actually been our API. Our Pacific Islander community has been the hardest hit. Some of our Lao communities and our Hmong communities, our elders have passed. But it also speaks volumes of how our API as well as our Latino communities are not getting healthcare, or the lack of services to healthcare. So we as a state are failing not just our community members, but our healthcare system, our education system, our outreach. So it is so vital and so important that advocacy and the power and the push to vote is vital, especially when it comes to advocating collectively. I think so often that we have functioned in silos, and I often tell my mentees and my law students when I work with them that law is by design. The systems that oppress us, the words "we the people" were created not by people that look like us. They were not refugees, they were not immigrants. They did not take into the heart of what it is to live on salt and water, or to flee bombs dropping on your country, right? To watch your family being raped and murdered. These are not the self-consciousness that walks into a room. Oftentimes when I'm sitting, whether it's on the ACLU board or the Oregon Commission, I am usually one of the only voices for refugees, one of the only voices for immigrant women, right? Speaking on volumes of my mom, my sisters, my family. It's very, very important for us to live and remember those legacies when we're advocating. And when we talk about the 3 branches of government, I want us to not think that we have to work in just one unit. I am a lawyer by trade in administrative law, but I have spread my wings to work in Okapia so that I could do legislative policy change. And I'm on AILA so that I could do national demands, especially as we look at 16,000 numbers. 16,000 deportees is what we have listed by immigration as the number of Southeast Asians who are formally deported. And these are based on what we call IRA, the 1996 law that is meant to intend to impact our Black communities with drug enforcement, which by ripple effect impacted us. And so when we talk about fighting and advocating and working together, it's a necessity. It's by design that they want us to work apart and to see each other as other. So that is my wish and my plea for all of our young folks. Don't ever get discouraged when they push you down, rise back up.
Thanks, Champon. That kind of leads nicely into how to be civically engaged and how to get your communities engaged. And I like this pull quote from the song, if we're gonna fix the US, we gotta start with them two letters, me and you. But when we kind of think about who's me and you, right? You could be someone who's not in your community and you should be fighting with them and for them too. And so I wanted to direct this next question to Chai. As Janpon kind of mentioned, certain barriers to civic engagement, being one of them being, working in silos, and how we can kind of break out of that and fight against the systems that aren't meant to, be inclusive of folks that look like you or like me. So could you talk about how you've surmounted certain obstacles to Southeast Asian American civic engagement to get out the count and the vote for census and elections?
Yeah, we're in Wisconsin, so it is so important that we actually engage and engage beyond the Southeast Asian community. But also what we've really noticed is, we were really the only state that still went into elections in the spring with the pandemic and safer at home. And so we started seeing how hard that was for our Southeast Asian community, having different information instantly. So one day we were voting, the next day we weren't. One day it was postponed and the next day it wasn't. So it was really hard. And we also know, like, for Hmong folks, their preferred way of voting was in person. So here we were with folks who had in-person plans to vote in person, now quickly having to teach them how to request absentee ballots, how absentee ballots worked, and knowing that none of that was interpreted into Hmong. And then some of our elders who actually didn't read or write English, who may not have anybody at home, now overcoming the barriers of having somebody be able to witness the absentee ballot for them and getting that turned in. And so we saw so many barriers that came through. The other things that we were seeing during the primary election in August was some of the polling places changed. And good thing we then started engaging the young folks in the community to be walking with the elders in their neighborhoods to the polling places. Otherwise, those who didn't read or write English would have gotten to the polling place, saw that it was closed and not know where to go. And so this time around, really to tackle a lot of those barriers, we are reaching our communities early. We've been having pop-ups in their communities, providing them with survival supplies, hand sanitizers, face masks, paper towels, bringing food into their neighborhoods and distributing that while providing tablets for folks to do their census, while providing tablets so we can help them request their absentee ballots. And we're going to be launching statewide election parties so that we can get folks together, so we can phone bank every single Southeast Asian in Wisconsin to say, hey, did you get your absentee ballot? And who's helping you with that? And so, but yeah, really taking care of a lot of that early on. The other thing we're seeing in Wisconsin too is a lot of voters have been dropped from the voter file. So we are now relying a lot on relational voting. We've noticed folks who've registered, who voted in every election that we've assisted with in the past, when they're checking the voter registration status, they're not showing up anywhere in the system, and we're having to re-register them. So while we do these pop-ups and we're making these calls, we're checking everybody's voter registration.
Thanks, Chai. I think from all of that, I'm seeing a lot of themes that are connecting with what we've mentioned too before, right? So when Chris was talking about how that data showed, even though it only had Vietnamese data about how they plan to vote in person, I think you've seen echoes in the Hmong community too, and how that should inform voting engagement strategies, right? Or engaging the youth so that they're able to take those elder community members to their polling places and help them find that. So I think, kind of referencing what Chris was saying earlier in the data that we do have, I wanted to pivot to knowing that these are the obstacles, knowing that these are some helpful strategies to use. What are some immediate actions that folks can take to seize civic engagement opportunities at the national level in 2020? And how does API Vote have resources that it can offer to help folks reach out to their networks to make sure that we're ahead of the curve? So I'll pass that to Chris.
Yeah, I really appreciate Alyssa helping put together these slides, because I realized we're dropping a lot of resources, and I'm so thankful everyone is also putting information in the chat. So if you at any point are like, I don't know what Chris mentioned, you can definitely double back and take a look at this. I think the first thing that I think everyone has mentioned here is the census. When we talk about, Shanfeng, you mentioned, actually both of you mentioned that, like, our communities are integrally linked to the Black community, like fighting for, like, that means we are fighting together. The census is a perfect example of that. Alyssa already pointed out that 1 in 4 Southeast Asian Americans live in hard to count tracts, and so when you're trying to get funding for those communities, they're often linked. So I think that's the first thing that I really want to emphasize. The deadline is coming up, and that is a very concrete thing we can do at a national level. You can text your friends across state lines, you can check in with them, and that's something really, really concrete that we can do. Alyssa, I believe there's another slide.
Okay, Phoebe.
Oh, sorry, my bad. So I think in terms of resources that I wanted to point out, we have, if you're trying to figure out kind of messaging strategies or how to talk to specific communities, again, the 2020 Asian American Voter Survey done by Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, API Vote, and obviously API data is out. I found that when I'm trying to figure out how different strategies to talk to communities, try and understand what's important to them, they have a lot of this information broken down. And so if you're trying to figure out that, it's really, really useful. Obviously, just from, if you know your own local community, then you know what to say. But it is a really good guiding point for those who are trying to understand like different communities and how to talk to them. In terms of what API Vote is doing nationally, oh, you can fact check actually. In terms of what API Vote is doing nationally, you can also join our outreach circle. Chai just mentioned that a lot of this is about like relational contact and knowing your community. Phone banking and text banking is fantastic, but when those touches come from your individual, like your friend network, your community network, people will often listen to you a lot more. So outreach circle, our API outreach circle is just a formalized version of that. It is basically the same as texting your friends, but in terms of reminding them about voting deadlines in the area, in terms of making sure they're filling out their census, it is just a way to check in with folks. So those links right there, you can see. If you're representing an organization and you want to work with API Vote, that's the top link. And if you're individual volunteers, like I care about my community, I might not be like representing an organization, but I want to help make sure that folks are ready to vote, they're registered, they have a plan. That is definitely also another option. And I think everyone has mentioned this, but and I mentioned this a couple of times, but when you check in with your friends and family, I think in terms of census, in terms of voting in particular, this upcoming November, a lot of trying to get them to register to vote is about just walking them through the process and being like, it's not super scary, I'm here with you. And so with that in mind, API Vote is also partnering with Rock the Vote to help folks register to vote. So you can text API to this short code, just 788-683, and you can actually help folks register to vote via text that way. So those are some options that we have, other things that we have on our website if you want to use them. I know Civic already has amazing Southeast Asian American resources, but we also have short 2-minute census videos translated in multiple languages. And a bunch of other resources on our website as well. So those are some of the things that we're providing on a national scale if you want to use these tools to talk to your friends, your family, your local neighborhood on either filling out the census or on registering folks to vote. And I think just a talking point on that I want to emphasize is that a lot of people might think they're registered to vote, but as Chai just mentioned, I'm just underlining everyone's points, is that those statuses can change. So even if your friends are really confident that they're registered to vote, just be like, you know, it doesn't hurt. It takes 30 seconds to just check your status. Can you do it really quick? That's a messaging tool that is universally applicable here. Last thing I just wanted to plug really quickly is that we have hotlines available in different languages. So API Vote and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, has a census hotline, which is 844-2020-API or 844-2020-0724, and a voting hotline, which is 188-API Vote. And for both of those, we have them in a number of languages. For Southeast Asian languages, we have them in Vietnamese. So those are also resources as you're trying to figure out how do I get more information about registering to vote, about vote, like what I can do at the polls, all those strategies. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Chris. On the topic of resources, I think the next slide should have our Civics 2020 in language voter guides. So we're super excited to launch those today. So basically what this is a relaunch of the voter guide that we launched in March, which was just in English. The process was we invited the presidential candidates from the major political parties to respond and share their policy stances in our 3 key issue areas: education, health, and immigration. So we now have these available in Southeast Asian languages, text and audio, since we heard from community members that some folks aren't necessarily able to read on the language, but they'll understand if we had audio. So we're happy to be able to offer both formats. Right now we have them in Hmong, Khmer, Mien, and Vietnamese, with the Lao version just being the audio for now, as we kind of make sure that the text is correct and there's no errors. So that is something we're really happy to offer. Hopefully it's a useful tool as you do outreach to your community members to make sure that when they're getting ready for election day, they're also making an informed vote. Just to kind of dive in a little bit about what it asked. In our 3 issue areas, it touched on these 3 kind of policy priorities that we have under each topic. So for education, we asked them about data disaggregation and data equity, culturally relevant K-12 support, and college access, affordability, and completion. Health, we talked about access to affordable healthcare, culturally and linguistically appropriate mental health services, and government programs to support low-income families. And then with immigration, we asked them about ending unjust mandatory detention and deportations, strengthening naturalization programs, and protecting and expanding family immigration. So with that, I know that the links will be shared in the chat for the 5 languages. And then we also have a CIRAC Southeast Asian American Get Out the Vote toolkit, which you can use to share these resources in your social media platforms and to your networks. So I will now just kind of wrap up this panel with one final question to Chanbon about how can we carry the momentum beyond 2020. I think there's a lot of momentum right now, and I'm glad to see a lot of engagement and enthusiasm that maybe wasn't there in prior years. But how can folks continue to be engaged past this year, maybe at the local or the state level?
Well, first and foremost, I hope that you guys and many of you on the call I know have been engaged for so long and will continue the work because our lives literally depend on it. The vote, I always tell, and I say it in the Lao language when I try to explain to our elders, it is our life. It is for some of our family is getting back removed to Laos, to a country they've never known, a language they can't speak, a culture they don't understand, right? So when we talk about voting and what we need to do, I don't want us to just think that we look at just the vote for the national election. For me, it's pushing and making sure every generation, 18 and older, but also our young generation that's coming up, understands how to be engaged. Some of the most brilliant minds are junior high and high school students re-evaluating the systems that they're hearing in social media and seeing that's flawed, and they're calling us out on it. They should, because we don't have all the answers. It takes a collective. So when I make the ask, what I want people to do to carry this momentum is first, self-care. Take a step back because social media is killing us at times. And when you feel that panic attack of that heart population, take a step back. It's okay. Self-care makes you stronger when you come back full force. That means engaging. I tell my young folks who want to do advocacy, take a picture of all your commissioners. They're all public records. Write down what they stand for, what they don't stand for. Take down your mayor's information. Take down all your local sheriff's information. Take down your governor, your AG, and guess what? Your DA. Because all of them have discretion and power to impact you on a daily. Where you go to school, what the kids get, what computer system, whether they get Wi-Fi in rural counties, right? We have to think bigger and as we look collectively in advocating and mobilizing. I think that's what we have to think of. It's a revolution that mobilizes every level. And we have, as older, myself being older, I have to teach the next generation on what they need to do to take over and the legacies of the old. Because honestly, the old white men comfortable in their chairs in the state of Oregon who wrote the anti-blackness policy in our land law so that we couldn't own land and brown people couldn't own property that was written in contracts, they don't want to leave. So what do we do better? How do we get around it? We have to think strategically and collectively. And so I hope that what you learn is that we continue conversations and continue to engage at every level. Learn and speak your truth, not anyone else's.
Thanks, Chanpon. Couldn't have said anything better. I'm really happy that you started off with self-care though, especially with so many folks responding at the top of the call saying how they're tired, how they're overwhelmed. I'm definitely guilty of that too. So hopefully everyone after tonight, if it's East Coast for you all, you take a break, you log off as much as you can, and you recharge as needed. But that concludes the end of the panel. So I will now open it up to questions from the audience for, I think we have 10 to 15-ish minutes here. So if you want to share verbally, feel free to raise your hand and then we can kind of go in some sort of order. But I know we have some queued up, so I wanted to get to some of these that came in the chat. So one of them is for folks here, could you talk about the differences and similarities between working at the federal versus the state level? I think all of my panelists are more than qualified to talk about that, but whoever maybe has an answer that they have ready.
I can weigh in a little bit from the federal level. I personally, just to clarify, I don't do policy work. So that's if that was your question, then that's definitely a different hat. But a lot of the work on a federal level honestly comes from trying to understand the balance between DC and honestly understanding those statewide, those local communities. A lot of federal work is just us being like, for at least for me, being like, okay, so I know, for example, I grew up in Washington, so I have a good grasp of there, and I have to unlearn my biases and be like, Washington, like my experience as like growing up in Washington as like a Vietnamese person doesn't project to every single AAPI in the United States. And so it's, for me, it is very much about listening to local community members, listening to those community organizations and being like, okay, what's something new that I learned? And as like someone who's trying to mobilize people to get out the vote, a lot of my work is about being able to listen to them and making sure that they feel listened to, which means you have to understand the differences in communities.
Thanks, Chris. Anything to add?
This is Shafan. Can I add a couple of things? Like in regards to for me, because I'm both in DC and I'm here on the West Coast, and mainly in the realm of immigration, doing anti-deportation work and trying to make sure that all of our representatives and our local congressional team understands the impact of that, especially on vulnerable communities like our community who has been screaming when they say, well, I'm representing the voiceless. No, Lao people are not voiceless. Vietnamese people, we've been screaming at the top of our lungs. We just never been heard, right? And so Oregon has been housed. We had the 122 men that were separated. The majority of those men that were held in Sheridan were South Asian men who were fleeing harm. So taking those real stories, what I always want you guys to understand is when dealing with the federal, you're very limited. So when I have meetings with my congressional team, all of us lawyers who are there are advocates, we have talking points, and you're in there, you have to have your papers prepared, ready to go. And remember, it's not the congressional people you need to bond with. It's their aide, it's their right hand. Get to know those people because they make the difference. Same thing goes for local. When I'm down in the Senate or the House and I'm trying to make calls, yes, they know talking points. Their heart may be in the right place, but it's actually their key staffers that's actually pushing policy through the bills, the witnesses, the testimonies. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. Chai, any last thoughts to add?
Yeah, I know the other two really talked about policy-wise, but I think like as the upcoming election and what the difference in working on like a national election and statewide election is, we can't let our people lose sight of what's happening locally in the state and not and only focus on the presidential election. In Wisconsin here, we have so much at stake. We actually have to put out all those people who put our lives at risk by choosing to make us vote in that spring election. So we have to really be able to balance both of those and prioritize the national election and the local election at the same time.
Great. I think we have someone who has raised their hand. So if one of our behind the scenes crew can unmute them. And just a reminder, when you share, if you could just share your name, just try to be as respectful as possible. And then if you could keep it concise to within 2 minutes, that'd be great. So if someone could unmute our next question who raised their hand.
Yes, Sovachana, go ahead.
That me? Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure, can everybody hear me, right? Good, that's wonderful. First, I would like to begin by express my gratitude for Civic to give all of us this platform or this advocacy training. I have learned a lot from yesterday, and I especially want to thank Gina yesterday. I tried to lock it in, but since I have 2 minutes, I want to make best use of my time and also the time of all the participants as well. So basically, my name is Sovachana. I'm from Cambodia. I live in Long Beach. I've been through many eras, since the Khmer Rouge killing my family to the Rodney King and now to George Floyd, blah, blah, blah on. And especially right now during the pandemic, I'm sure that there's no aspect of life that has not been untouched or unaltered by the global pandemic in all of us. And basically, and especially, I thank the young speaker, panelists. You have so much energy, so much knowledge. I think the whole idea is not lack of resource. We have too much resource based on what I just see from you. And personally, myself, don't know which resource is best for me. That's too much available in the age of technology. My question to all the panelists is, today I'm quite confused, with the rhetoric. And one side, they talk about law and order, especially from Portland, Seattle, and New York, bar just based on this morning information, just tell them this, promote anarchists, as this. On the other hand, you have the racial injustice. It's been there since I came in this country, this America. I call it a conditional citizen I have, because no matter what happened, even I have my citizenship, I still consider as an outsider with the way they look at me, with the way they talk to me, with the way they work, with the promotion, whatever, all of us go through this. Anyway, my question to all the panelists, and how would you explain to me and to maybe all the people on these two diverse views? One of them focus on law and order. They said the people, like, for example, in Portland, by the way, I graduated in University of Oregon in 1978, and I earned my master degree, 2 master in curriculum instruction at Portland State. So Portland is quite familiar to me. So how would you explain the idea about law and order and the racial, systematic racial? Because these two items, these two things make people very confused, undecided. In one hand, the people in Long Beach I talked to who own business, they said, well, those people just utilize this opportunity to rob, to steal, all this. And on the other hand, the hardcore people like myself would look us as racism as really embedded in this country, and we need change. But how would you respond to this? How you make the decision? Because I think regarding of all the pandemic, I think November 3rd is probably more important than anything else besides the pandemic. And all of us need to vote. All of us need to register, census, and all of those. We all do all the good things for the benefit of our future children and our children. So how would you respond to this? How this come to play? To be clear, as a voter, Trump advocates that, and to me, Biden is quite, he's a little bit older president, and we need much more bolder. Yet, all the things that President Trump recently did is clear that the white supremacy continue to rule. So how you explain that to me, and to be more decisive, on which thing I would like to choose, and using your perspective. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thanks for that question. I think it's definitely something that folks are grappling with. I might punt this to Chanpon, but I think other panelists feel free to jump in too.
I think that that's such a wonderful and a phenomenal question that you ask, and one that requires a lot of pause and thoughts. So I want us first to address what it is when we talk about law and order and the historical framework in which we all live, and our family and our future children and family members. We have to think about law and order as the way when we talk about the judicial branch and the legislative branch and our executive branch. But most often when people think about law, they think about the judicial, right? But we also have to talk about who created those laws, right? When we talk about the actual formation of the Constitution itself, the Bill of Rights, and when I said we the people, who was included in the crafting of those words? It wasn't you and I. They didn't consider. A lot of the people who wrote those words were slave owners. And then I want to go back to what does law truly mean, right? The word law, the word police, the word reform, the way that we've created law, and I am a lawyer and I am a litigator. I'm in court. I defend every aspect of people, from the victims of crime, working with law enforcement, to FBI, to actual or judicial branch to do restorative justice. When we think about law, I want us to go back to the historical context of why police came about. They were actually brought in by slave owners to go and round up our African American and brown people who were escaping, which includes our Chinese who were brought in to work the railroads. And it's important for us to talk about what did they have the right to do. It was not just rounding up. They actually had the right under the law, if we were not to listen and the slaves were not coming back, to actually kill and murder them. What I want also to explain in the state of Oregon, why this is so heated and why the Black Lives Matter movement is so personal to me and to many of my board members in the community, is we historically in the state of Oregon, we are one of the 2 states in the entire US that actually wrote in the laws that Black people were not allowed to own property. We didn't just push out our Native Americans and colonize and rape and pillage and killed. We actually then created laws that Native Americans couldn't have clean water. When we had talked about COVID, our Native communities were the ones that suffered the most. Then they became our Latinos, our Blacks, our Asian, right? It's always a ripple effect. And so when the law changed, I want you guys to understand this. The formation of Oregon, right, was in the 1800s. The law that created systematic racism and oppression of our Black community that said they couldn't own land, which means they couldn't get the same education as white people, which means they couldn't have the same access to health. It actually didn't get repealed until 2002. Did you hear me? That's 18 years ago. And we still, in the state of Oregon, had 38% of voters who said they wanted to keep it as a historical context. It should continue to have it as laws in the books. I, as someone who am in Salem, our capital, fighting for these laws, as you know, you were Go Ducks, U of O. I'm there quite a bit with our Eugene brothers and sisters, trying to make sure that our voices, because we've been screaming, Black people have been saying, hey, you literally wrote that we can't own land, but you also said if we show up in the lands that you can kill us, hurt us. That's actually in our books. And so when we talk about law and order, that is such a deep, deep philosophical question. But first, we almost and always have to go contextually to what the words are written. I always want you guys to start out with, when you look at law, who's not included in the law? Not who's included, but who's not and why we're not included. So when we talk about legislative policy, who actually are the policymakers, federal, state, local, you look at why. The why did Congress write these laws the way that they did? Because they were omitted for a reason. I hope that answers your question. It was long.
Thanks, Chanpon. And I think just wanted to pivot this to more generally how we talk to our communities about issues like the Black Lives Matter movement and how we're, showing up in that fight that we're a part of as well. And I think if Gina could just relink everyone to the resources that CREC has compiled from our partners and community members about having these conversations with our networks and our family members, because it's inevitably going to come up as we talk about, how we're voting and how we're showing up and how we're being civically engaged. So thanks for that question. I know that was a big question to kind of tackle. And we're unfortunately going to just keep an eye on time. So for these questions that we didn't get to, I can definitely follow up with folks afterwards, after the call, and connect you as needed to our speakers if they're able to kind of chat with you later. But I'm going to pivot now to a call to action, because why are we here on this call? It's about civic engagement. And I think I want to capitalize on the fact that we have, 50 plus people here. And I think if we can each reach out to 5 people, we have already reached, 250. So if we can take 5 minutes of action together, text 5 family members or friends to remind them to fill out their census or to register to vote, to make sure that their voter registration status hasn't changed. And so big thanks to Chris, who shared these scripts that everyone can use. And if you also have time, and if you're feeling extra ambitious, if you're wanting to contact your senators to urge them to extend the census deadline. So there's currently legislation introduced by 3 senators to extend the deadlines to make sure that we have adequate time for the Census Bureau to get a full and accurate count of our communities. So these are just 2 things that we can do in 5 minutes. So for the next 5 minutes, I'm not gonna force everyone to, but I think it'd be great if you could just take some time to just reach out to those in your network where it's not as big of a lift if you reach out to your cousin or your grandma or your uncle or your nieces and nephews to make sure that they're being counted or they're registered to vote, and that we're all being civically engaged. So I'm just gonna set the mood with a little bit of music. Whether or not you participate, it's up to you, but hopefully you can just take 5 minutes to just do this. So I'll just start playing music and hopefully y'all can reach out. Phoebe, I'm gonna cut off the screen share real quick.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn.
Some additional opportunities to engage. So just after this, there's actually a text party, since it's National Voter Registration Day, from 7 to 8, held by the hashtag API 2020 Coalition. And following that, immediately after, it's a packed night, I'll let Chris from the 2020 Project tell you about what Zuko Tuesday is.
Yeah, I'll put on my 2020 Project hat. Thanks, Alyssa. So anyone who's a fan of Avatar, we're essentially Dante Bosco, who's the voice of Prince Zuko, Crown Prince of the Fire Nation, is hosting with us an entire event on voting. There's going to be Avatar trivia. We have a section where he will like hop on and try and like have a like we're having those conversations with family members, so like try and have a conversation with like a friend, asking like, hey, are you like registered to vote? We call it an Agni call for anyone who is a fan. Other folks, we have Ruby Ibarra hopping on for a performance. Some other folks like hopping on for a music panel. Some other shout out videos. Honestly, at the end of the day, we're trying to get folks registered and ready to vote. So if you're a fan of any of the people that I mentioned, or if you just want to come and have a good time after a packed night and decompress a little bit, we hope that will be the space for you, and also to get folks to register to vote. Oh yes, Senator Tammy Duckworth is also speaking. So if you're from Illinois, we just want to hear what she has to say about civic engagement, please come along. And as a sneak preview, if anyone is a fan of both voting and Avatar trivia, Dante Bosco, the prize for that will be Dante Bosco recording a custom voice message. So if you are a fan of Avatar, if you know someone who is, please come along. Thank you for the plug, Alyssa.
Of course, and I love the love for Zuko and Avatar in the chat. You know your event has good guests when a senator is like a side note when you're advertising it. So hopefully we see some of y'all there as well at 8 p.m. Eastern. Some other ways via CRAC are to sign up for our Basecamp page, which has voter engagement and elections resources, events, updates. So that has partners as well as community members in there putting up updates, putting up events for folks to plug in. So if you're interested in that, I'll be sending a link in the follow-up email, as well as registering for our upcoming trainings this week. So I hope that this gave some sort of sense of virtual community, even in these times. We have 3 more sessions this week as part of our digital advocacy training series with health, education, and immigration in the queue. But with that, I wanted to close out with one more question, one more thought, one more reflection to our panelists in terms of what's one takeaway that you'd like to offer everybody on today's call as kind of a ending note. So I will punt that to Chris first.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. As you can tell, all of the folks here do a range of different civic engagement activities. And so I think I want to say we are so focused on the November 2020 election, but repeatedly you've heard that that shouldn't stop at the election. It should be, for folks who haven't been engaged before, this should be an activation point. So for example, with events that are maybe more lighthearted, like Zuko Tuesday, that shouldn't be the end goal, right? We should be continuing to educate and inform folks on what's happening. So I hope that, I'm so glad that everyone's here, and thank you for giving us all a platform. I hope we keep that momentum past 2020. And I think the main thing also is we talked about people who are eligible to vote now. The Southeast Asian population, I said, on average, it is just slightly over 60% of all Southeast Asian Americans here are voting eligible, like voting age eligible, which means we have a significantly young population that is going to continue to carry on that engagement and fight.
Thanks, Chris. I'll punt it to Chai.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just on that again, let's engage young folks. We have such a young community and we need to engage them, even those who aren't eligible to vote. I'm seeing in the Hmong community, false YouTube videos are really pushing our community members to be voting against us. And our young folks are the ones who are going to be doing that education inside their homes now because we can't get there. So engage the young folks, because they're going to be the easiest group to engage and mobilize them.
Thanks, Chai. Champong?
I love what everyone's saying. I would also encourage us to use our elders because they also have a lot of time and they speak the native tongue very well. What we've done here is having our elders say messages that they can send to friends and family about why it's so important, especially for our bilingual and bicultural families. When the Black Lives Matter movement happened here in Portland, that's what we engaged our elders to do, was to explain why their grandson, who may be half Black, why their life is important, that they may not understand it. But aside from everything else, and it was very emotional and wonderful, but it's think outside the box, the way that we engage and how we can mobilize. But yes, continue, think of your TikToks, your Snapchats, be creative.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And that kind of concludes tonight's presentation. So I'll just give another huge shout out to all three of our panelists today. I think you each brought something different and special to the discussion today. And I'm so thankful that you all were able to help me, say things way better than I could have tonight. And so with that, resources will be available in the chat for anything that you might want to check out more after this call. And we'll also be sending out a follow-up email. And as I mentioned, we have some more trainings this week if you're interested in some more specific policy areas that our amazing policy team is going to lead. So thank you everyone. I know we are 5 minutes over-ish, and I know it's a little bit late for those of you on the East Coast, but thank you so much for your time. I hope you're walking away with at least one learning or one takeaway that you can use in your work. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you at the next CRAC event. Thanks, everyone.